which they shall not be able to escape. And though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken to hear them.
Welcome, Feminerds. This is another exciting episode of Unlike Any Known Colors. I'm Becca.
And I'm Estee.
And we are here to talk about the film Us, the newest creation by Jordan Peele.
Yes.
Which I really enjoyed.
We're fresh out of it. We saw it last night.
For the second time.
For the second time. So there's two people to really thank here. Jordan Peele, number one, but also Becca, who's not a big fan of horror movies, saw it twice that we can do another episode of Unlike Any Known Colors.
Yeah, and
awesome.
I really enjoyed this film. I was thinking about it last night and this morning, and I think it's gonna kind of inch its way up to some of my favorite films, and we'll delve into that here in a bit.
There's so much to think about. So we'll start with just a brief synopsis. This comes from IMDb. It says, a family's serene beach vacation turns to chaos when their doppelgangers appear and begin to terrorize them. I mean, there's ways to, that's like boiling it down.
It's like the most simplified version.
Burned minerals left on the bottom of the pan. There's so much to talk about here. I mean, even last night, the guy came into the theater and was kind of like, get out, because we were still talking about all the things to think about and discuss from this movie. Is really, really a good one. So let us, from here on out, major spoilers.
So many spoilers.
We're going to be dissecting this thing within an inch of its life. Be warned.
Turn back now. Actually, just go see it, because it's
probably
really good, and then you can come back and listen.
If you haven't seen it and you're listening, that's cool. If you're not interested in seeing it, we're not interested in knowing you. So say bye in the comments.
Let's start with talking about the opening credits scene, which I think is really, really interesting. It comes after we get a flashback scene of the main character, Adelaide, played to perfection by Lupita Nyong'o. The two characters that she plays, just phenomenal. But her character is a small child. She's with her parents at Santa Cruz Beach. It's her birthday.
1986.
1986. Her dad wins her a Michael Jackson Thriller t-shirt.
Yes.
She's carrying a red candy apple. She wanders off down to the beach and then into a hall of mirrors called Shaman's Quest, which is very racist, but we'll talk about that later.
Vision Quest, even.
Vision is a shaman's vision quest. And there she sees another little girl that looks exactly like her. So then we get this opening sequence of this rabbit in a very small cage, a white rabbit in a small cage, and the camera pans out very slowly to all of these rabbits in these cages against the wall of what looks like a classroom with red title cards and a very interesting score.
Yes. I looked up the score. It's a guy named Michael Abels. He's actually a professor of music, and he was responsible also for the score of Get Out, but beyond that, he hasn't done much in terms of scoring films. I think he'll probably have a lasting collaboration. But that music is really cool in a few different ways. As somebody who's not very educated on music, the percussion element of it, the drums of it, they have these clanging bells, like these chiming bells that I cannot get enough of. I love that effect. And then also it's kind of like a chanting singing.
Which when I first heard it, and the second time I heard it, I thought it was Japanese.
Yeah.
It sounds very
I was not schooled enough
Eastern.
to know, what it was. And then I did read a little bit about it because, what does it say? Does it say something? It was a Swahili kind of syllabic chanting. So it's basically nonsense chanting, but using Swahili tones.
Which is really, really interesting. And it really is unsettling in a very, not a totally creepy way, but definitely is unusual for people who grew up in a Western culture and are used to Western music. It definitely doesn't follow I don't have a background in music theory, but it doesn't follow the kind of major scales, the kind of typical sounds, chords in Western music.
was
And
gonna
so
say-
it feels very unnatural.
It was almost discordant, but it really isn't.
Right.
To
It just is unfamiliar.
ears. But it was really also to enhance the creepiness. When the music first starts up, it's focused very closely on the rabbit's eye.
Yes.
Which you can tell it's not a human eye because there's fur around it, but it's a blue eye with a black iris.
It's
and
very
it
unsettling.
It looks almost, when I first saw that shot in the trailer, I thought it was a human eye. It was some sort of like Island of Dr. Moreau or something. Yeah. So it's very, and it's creepy to have those beings caged up very small and very close confined quarters, and you pair it with that music and the red title, and you're just like, okay, what are we getting into right now?
Right. And then immediately after that sequence ends, we cut to present day. It's an overhead shot of a car driving down a highway, beautiful scenery, and Janelle Monáe comes on, which, shout out to Janelle Monáe for being the goddess and queen of music.
Indeed.
It really just made me excited to hear that, but also, in the second viewing, Dirty Computer and her past works have always kind of had this storyline of androids versus humans, because it takes place in the future. So then I was remembering how when Red and the doppelgangers first show up, I thought that they were androids because of the way that Lupita Nyong'o moved as Red at first was very robotic and very interesting. So then I was like, well, I'm probably, reading too much into it, but it was kind of a fun little connection for me.
But that's what's really cool about this movie is that I feel like, of course, Jordan Peele has his vision, but whatever we are reading into it makes sense.
That's true.
And all possible interpretations are okay. It's not like it plays out and you're like, I guess that doesn't really work. It could kind of work because so much of the inner movie mythos about the doppelgangers, where they came from, how they subsist, how they get, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And if you try to think about it too much, I feel like that way lays madness. And last night in the movie theater, I told you the lyrics from Mystery Science, if you're wondering how he eats and breathes and other science facts, repeat to yourself, it's just a show. I should really just relax. Like, maybe I'm trying to make it work too much, and I should be thinking about broader themes, more abstract themes, than the practical reality.
Sure. That was actually a point that I was thinking of, too, that there are a lot of things that happen that in our universe doesn't really make sense, but in the universe of the film, I'm totally on board with. Like, again, those little things, those details, I don't necessarily have to know how it all works out. I'm just there for it.
Yeah. I want to make a point on the opening title too, with the family driving in a car. Classic Shining throwback too, because that's how it started. And we see, I think Jordan Peele talks a lot about his affinity for The Shining. There's a really good interview with Paul Thomas Anderson in this edition of Fangoria that they discuss that. If you watch Key and Peele, one of my favorite sketches is a throwback to The Shining. So once you start to prime yourself for Shining references, you'll see them, and I think it's really cool.
Yeah, and you'll be able to speak more on that because you also can see those nods to other horror films that I won't necessarily recognize. So we are introduced to Adelaide's family. In the present day, she's married to the adorable and charming Winston Duke as Gabriel, and they have 2 kids, Zora, who I would say is about 15 or 16, and Jason, who is probably about 8 or 9. They're going to their vacation home to vacation, and they're
summer.
setting up. Yep. And Gabriel suggests that they go to the beach, and Adelaide does not want to do that. This beach is the site of her trauma, of her childhood trauma. She's not interested in going back there, but Gabriel, in his charming, adorable way, convinces
his
her.
pouty little boy way.
He's hilarious, by the way.
We'll talk about that later. There's not enough can be said about him in this movie. A lot will be said about Lupita Nyong'o's performance, rightly so.
Yeah.
Don't overlook him.
Yeah. And so they go to the beach. They meet up with some friends of theirs. And then Jason, after going to the bathroom and kind of wandering off, sees something quite unusual.
A man standing on the beach with his hands kind of off by his sides. Like, imagine you pointing your arms, not straight at your sides, but off kilter a little bit. And it appears that he's wearing some sort of red pants. He's got sandals on, but he's got a really dirty overcoat on. And his hands are at his sides, and it comes to another shot, a close-up shot of the hand, and blood starts dripping off the hand.
Yeah. And what I didn't realize, because, of course, with the second viewing I had more insight, it appears that he was the first one to...
One of the first ones.
Complete this. He's one of the first ones who is fulfilling Red's
this vision
and plan, because we see as they're driving into town to the beach, he has murdered his counterpart.
There's it looks like a man who's experienced significant homelessness is being loaded into an ambulance, and appears he's been stabbed, and he's holding a very battered cardboard sign. It says Jeremiah 11:11 on it.
So Jeremiah 11:11, which we quoted at the beginning of this podcast, from the King James Bible version.
King LeBron James, yes.
Reads, I will bring evil upon them, which they shall not be able to escape, and though they shall cry unto me, I will not hearken unto them. So definitely ominous. That character never commits any act of violence, or
that we see. It's just implied.
Yeah, he's just standing there, but Adelaide saw him when she was a child.
As a young man.
At the beach, carrying that same sign. So she is starting to see all of these things. Somebody tosses a frisbee, it lands on the blanket perfectly in line with these circles on the blanket. When
the twins say the same thing at the same time. These are the daughters of Josh and Kitty, played by Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss. Jinx, 1, 2, 3, all that stuff. So coincidences start piling up.
And when they go back to the house that night, Adelaide is trying to tell her husband, Gabriel, what happened to her when she was a child and why she wants to leave.
Why she
doesn't want to stay.
At dis-ease. Yeah.
And one of the best acting performances, I think, I've seen. We see her speech through her reflection in the window.
She's like, it looks like she's speaking to herself, even though we know she's speaking to Gabe behind her.
Yeah, it's really, really
But you
powerful.
can't make out her face.
Yeah, it's so great. And then things go to shit. And it's
the
fun.
Power goes out, and there's a family in the driveway, and kablooey.
Yep.
If you've seen the trailer, you basically kind of know, you get the narrative arc of the film, you just don't get, the nitty-gritty of it.
Yeah. So let's delve into some of that nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
We won't bog you down with more exposition, because you really should just go see the film. So I just want to talk a little bit about the characters' names.
Yes.
So Winston Duke plays Gabriel.
The most, sorry, I gotta jump in. He nails, I don't know if he is a dad or if he's just a wonderful actor, maybe both. I know he's a wonderful actor, but he nails, being an obnoxious dad with the jokes and the goofiness.
Yeah.
To perfection. Now, I have a great goofy dad, so I was, groaning at the dad jokes, and just every little mannerism of his is so perfect.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I laughed a lot more in the second viewing.
We both did.
I think the first time we saw it, I know I was a lot more tense and nervous, and so I was much more kind of into the story of not knowing what was happening. And so by the second time, I knew what was coming. I knew the twist. I was a little more relaxed, and so there was a lot more that I found funny.
And it was also funny that we two were the only ones really laughing in the theater. I think it's because maybe the other people were first viewers, but you and I are cackling our heads
right.
off.
There were also only 8 people the second time we saw it.
That's
so
true.
Everybody go see it. Anyway, Gabriel.
Sorry, Gabriel played by Winston Duke.
The name Gabriel is biblical. It's Hebrew for God is my strength, but can also mean strong man or hero. Gabriel is the angel that comes to Mary to tell her that she's pregnant with the baby Jesus. Yeah. And then his counterpart, I don't know if we want to call them doubles, clones, doppelgangers.
I think doppelganger works best.
Okay.
Because, again, nitty-gritty, are they cloned? I don't know. So I think because official documents from the production company use the word doppelganger, I think that's a good one to go with.
Cool, and I want to talk about clones later too.
Yes.
So his doppelganger is named Abraham, which is also a biblical Hebrew name meaning father of many. So I thought it was really interesting that both sides of that character had a very biblical name, a very ancient name, a very powerful name. Like, if you say the name Abraham, most people know it's a biblical name, who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Moving on to Adelaide, played by Lupita Nyong'o. Her Adelaide, that name is German and it means nobility, which I thought was really interesting. And then, of course, her doppelganger is named, or calls herself, Red. I was looking at some biblical symbolism for the color red, and one of the first things that I found said that the color red symbolizes humanity. And I thought that was really interesting because it sort of makes sense as far as like blood,
fire and all that.
fire, energy, strength, determination, but that clearly has symbolism in her journey
And also
and what
anger.
what she is trying to accomplish
Right.
and what she has experienced. Zora, who I think is my favorite character, and we can talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Her name is Slavic, but in several different areas, both African, Arabic, Slavic, her name means dawn. So kind of this rebirth almost, but kind of light at the end of the tunnel sort of situation.
A light newness.
And then her doppelganger is named Umbre,
And spell that, because
which is Umbrae, which is a plural of the word umbra, which literally means shadow.
nice.
And so umbre, an umbra,
Light and shadow.
yep, shadowy apparition, phantom. What I really loved is I found a definition that described it as the invariable companion of a person or thing.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm surprised not everyone was named that. I love it.
So cool.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have Jason, the sun. That's a Greek name. It means to heal. And Pluto is the Roman god of the underworld. So there's so much to dissect in this film.
Yes.
I think there's so much thought that was put into these characters and who they are and what they represent, that there's just so much to cover. It's really, really fun.
I didn't look at the meaning of the names, but Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss, they're friends, Josh and Kitty. So Josh's doppelganger is named Tex. And Kitty's is named Dahlia.
Interesting.
Like, where is this coming from? Like, Tex?
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. It's so weird.
And Dahlia's a flower.
Yeah.
That's very,
Okay.
very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's so much, like I said, so much to cover. Zora, I think I would love to talk about her for a bit because after the second viewing, I really think she's my favorite character. She embodies, she's played by a young actress named Shahadi Wright Joseph. She embodies the typical teenager, a little bit sassy, a little bit
Annoyed.
Talks back,
Yeah.
annoyed, doesn't really want to hang out with her family, definitely doesn't get along with the other teenagers that she interacts with, at least in this film. I imagine she has a very strong group of friends from where they live.
She's always on that damn phone.
She's
so
always on
maybe
the phone.
She's texting them.
Yep, she does track and field, so she's very accomplished. She's very interesting, and she's very, very smart. When the doppelgangers first show up, Adelaide says, Zora, put on your shoes, and she immediately does it.
She looks
doesn't
at her
talk
mother
back.
and she turns and goes.
Yep. And then when Gabriel is like, Jason, get me the bat, and Jason's like, what bat? Zora knows.
She's
she
gone
knows
to
where the
get it
bat is.
already.
She's gotten it, and she's given it to him. She drives the car later on. She kills one of the twins with the golf club, and she just really has this strength of character that in this viewing I felt like she got from her mom, like seeing Adelaide and how she dealt with all of this and her strength. I felt like Zora got that from her mom, which then makes it so much weirder and more twisted when you realize that she came from beneath.
Yeah.
Adelaide did.
Yeah. I really like Zora too, and I like the texture that she has, because even though she has the typical teenager ennui, that she still listens to her parents, and that even though she's really annoyed by her brother, she still looks out for him and protects him in a way that isn't overbearing. It's not infantilizing of him. Like the twins, Josh and Kitty's, make fun of Jason because he's building a tunnel on the beach and it gets wrecked. And they're like, he's really weird. And she's just like, she doesn't say, oh yeah, or
Yeah.
But I think Zora really, in a different way than Adelaide does, embodies the spirit of the final girl.
Yeah.
As somebody that gets tossed into the mix, and because of her inner attributes, she finds a strength to overcome and to be strong and to think and to be quick on your feet. One of my favorite scenes that she does, she grabs a golf club there in Josh and Kitty's house, and Fuck the Police is blazing, kind of funny. And she's going up the stairs because they have seen their mother being pulled in by the doppelgangers, and they're going down the hall because they've heard cries upstairs. They start to pass an open door. She quickly closes it. Smart.
Yeah, I noticed
and she
that
keeps
too.
moving in.
Both times.
Twin comes blasting out. She knocks her down, and then she shakes out that arm because she's getting it warmed up, ready for the next one. I can't believe I did that, but I'm ready to do what I have to do. And then she pretty grossly devastates another one. We don't see it, but we hear it. So, yeah, for me, Zora was the final girl. Adelaide wasn't. She has her own ingenuity in how to deal with that situation. Of course, probably Zora learned that. But she does, because of the complications with the doppelganger, I don't think she fits that kind of final girl trope so well.
Yeah, and I think Shahadi Wright Joseph does such a good job as Umbre too. She's terrifying, that smile.
Very creepy.
And her death is very tragic. I feel sad when she dies, even though I know that she was kind of raised to have one purpose. It feels like all of these people kind of have a singular purpose, but it felt sad to me.
Maybe let's talk about that for 1 second, because I feel like that'll help us ground our other discussions. So who are these doppelgangers and why? The opening scene that we see, even before the scene that you beautifully described, is an opening title card that talks about how there are a lot of underground subterranean tunnels in the United States, thousands of miles of them, abandoned subway tracks, service routes. Some have many unknown purpose at all. And then 1986 at the fair. So we come to find out there are a couple exposition dumps in this film, but I think are handled pretty well. They can be really annoying when you'd rather show, not tell. But at the end, where there's the final confrontation between Adelaide and Red in the tunnels underground, you come to understand that these doppelgangers are what Red calls the tethered, and that they come from some kind of government project where they figured out how to make a copy of the people above to try to control them. The problem was, though, is that they couldn't figure out how to copy the soul. However, that soul is still shared by the two of those people. So they abandoned the project, and thus they abandoned the untethered, or rather the tethered underground. And then it becomes very strange. This is where it got too analytical. Well, how did they eat all those rabbits? That's what they eat. Well, how did they get their clothes? How do they reproduce?
Right.
Maybe,
how do they know that the clothes they're wearing matches the clothes of the people?
Yeah, if the project is abandoned, is it like delivered in pneumatic tubes, or do bunny rabbits? Like, I don't know. It's weird, but knowing that that's the complication, I think that helps.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this. I don't really believe in cloning. I mean, I believe that you can replicate a cellular structure that perfectly matches something else. But I believe in a soul. I don't know what that is made of or what that looks like. And I think even if you cloned somebody's body and raised them in the same way, the circumstances of their growing up would be different, just based on, even if you tried to replicate those experiences,
As they've
that person
demonstrated
is
with
going to
twin
be
studies.
that person's
Yeah.
going to be a different person.
Yeah.
So this idea is really interesting to me, that they cloned a body, but that the soul was split between those two bodies. And Red says this has been going on for generations, which to me is really interesting, because then if these people are tethered to the people that live above ground, so if Adelaide married Gabriel, Red is going to marry, I'm putting that in quotes because I don't know what happens down there,
Yeah.
Abraham, and they have children. The DNA of their children in this world, not in real life, in this world, would then be identical to the children that Adelaide and Gabriel had, meaning they would then share a soul as well.
Yes.
So to me, I was on board with this idea of like when the tethered reproduced, they were following the same model that was whatever was happening above ground.
Well, it's kind of gross and creepy to think about it, but you do see at various points where flashback, it's kind of like our loops that we talked about with Russian Doll. You go up and down to see how actions are mirrored. Mm-hmm. So you see people like in a room like shaking around because they're mimicking being on a roller coaster, or people are like eating rabbit, but up above they're eating French fries. Well, you can imagine if somebody is doing something up above, making love, if you will, down below, that the same similar sort of something might happen.
Yeah. So that is a great segue into something else I was thinking about, which is the idea of predestination and versus free will. So there are some religions out there that believe that our destinies are controlled, that we are following a path that has been set out for us, that every decision we make has been preordained by a higher power, and that we don't have any sort of control over our lives. And then, of course, I think most of us believe in some form of free will, whether or not we're religious, whether or not we believe that our actions have certain consequences. We do believe that we have control over what we do. So to have this group of people, the tethered, who don't have that control, but then find that control or somehow take that control is very interesting and somewhat liberating in a scary kind of way, because the doppelgangers and the tethered are meant to be scary and meant to be threatening. Mm-hmm. But why don't we talk a little bit about Red's journey, because we were talking last night about the dance sequence, which, as I was thinking back on it, those two dances were not mirrored. And so what Red was performing down in the tunnels was not the same thing as what Adelaide was performing up in the real world.
Yeah, they were somewhat similar, but it was not the same. Yeah, for sure. So the ultimate zing in this movie is not the last scene, which usually it is. The family has triumphed. Red is dead. Family is safe. They are escaping in an ambulance 1111, by the way, driving again in the hills like they were. And she starts to have a bit of a flashback. And she's flashing back again to the boardwalk in 86, and again going into Shaman's Vision Racist Quest. But what you come to find out is that Adelaide, our protagonist, our hero that we've been rooting for this whole time, was actually a tethered. That for some reason she knew to go up enough to choke out the real Adelaide, drag her down below, handcuff her to a bed, take her Thriller shirt, and go back up and take her place. So the whole time, it wasn't just, oh, these nasty, weird, untethered, but that there was a tethered all this time trying to fight against this.
Yeah, and the first time I saw it, I tend to not try and figure out twists of films when I'm watching them. I like to just go for the ride and then enjoy when something surprises me. I expected that somebody would take somebody's place in the time frame
Present
of
day?
the film.
Yeah.
And then to find out that...
No, it was 86.
Yeah. So that was really, really cool. And then I was thinking about, Red is the only one of the tethered who speaks.
And
her
she
voice
speaks-
is all creepy and gross because she got strangled as a child.
The tethered do vocalize.
They vocalize, but they
it's a
don't-
weird kind of velociraptor sound.
Yeah.
It's grunting and yeah. So it's really interesting because then you start to think, how did Red? It's not just her family that comes up, and it's not just Josh and Kitty's family. It's every tethered that comes up to do this.
Yeah.
How did she manage to do that? And I think that's part of Red's journey here. But one thing I wanted to say too is that in the first kind of exposition dump, when the tethered family breaks in and they're sitting across from each other in front of that fireplace, if you've seen the trailer, you know what it looks like. She's describing the story. Once upon a time, there was a girl, and she's telling the story of tethered Red and untethered Adelaide, if you want to put it that way. And then the family is separated because they're, going to take care of business. They're going to kill him. And Adelaide says, "What do you want?" And Red is like devouring her fear, and then she looks back like confused, like, "What do you mean? What do I want?" And I think at that point, Adelaide really didn't remember. Maybe she was lying. I don't know. But for me, it felt like another reason for Red to be enraged, because Adelaide, you stole my life, and now you don't even remember doing it. And that ties back into some ideas about privilege that I want to talk about in a little bit too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Red's journey and Adelaide's journey start and end with Michael Jackson's Thriller, I guess. Maybe we should have talked about that more time.
Yeah, but you brought up a really good point last night too about Adelaide stopped dancing when she said 14. 14. And that is when, according to Red, she started planning this, what they call the untethering.
And Red also said that it was the dance that let the other tethered know, they kind of lower hands on her, like it was very messianic kind of, that somehow through that dance, the tethered were convinced that Red, as she says, would deliver them.
Yeah, so you brought up a really interesting point about maybe when Red had that experience, Adelaide in some way felt that, and that's why she stopped dancing.
There is some connection, and maybe if you were tethered up top, that some of that power, that connection will flow back to you, that you feel it. The tethered feel it. That the people above don't.
Adelaide was a tethered
Yeah.
in the first place. She was born down there. And so she may have a stronger connection than anybody else.
There's some power in the dance, I guess, if you want to put it that way, that unleashes, that untethers the tethered in that way, that let them know that. But at the same time, then I think, well, what let little Red know that she should go up? To be brave enough to go up. There's like this big escalator. They never leave these tunnels. They have no idea. They don't even speak. How would she know? She somehow knew to go up there and knew she had a shot to swap. So there's something, I don't know, it's kind of like maybe the Chosen One arc is in here. But yeah, so there's something about that dance, because that dance, which is referenced a couple times before then, is mirrored at the same time with what I call the Dance of Death. And that's when Red and Adelaide are having their final fatal battle. The exposition dump is done, and now it's time for one or both of us to die. So it's that great music from I Got Five on it, but again, it's slowed down and sped up.
So good.
It's beautiful and creepy, and so you see the ballet dancing, and you see this dance of death, which ends, yes, in death.
Yeah, and one of my favorite scenes, I think, I'll circle back to the score just a little bit. I think it's very, very well done. Again, I don't have a huge history with a lot of horror films, so I don't know the tropes that most soundtracks follow. I think a lot of the score and soundtrack definitely helped complement what was happening on screen, but it never felt heavy-handed. It never felt like it was leading me to feel something, especially having watched the trailer many times before I saw it initially. So I was expecting some sort of musical score to accompany the point when the doppelgangers break into the house, and that didn't happen. When they first break away on the driveway, it's silent and it's scary.
That's why.
Right.
That's the scary part, yeah. For me, as having a big appetite for horror films, I've found the score to be really masterful. I don't often look it up. In our past Feminerd Files podcasts, I've done a lot of complaining about music and varied things. So I was really, for example, when Zora is facing off with Umbre, and she's run away, but Umbre's caught up to her, and they're both on opposite sides of a car, and they're looking through the window at each other. There's this little trill on strings that comes in. Perfect. You don't need massive bombastic stuff. If that scene is already really scary because I'm not sure if Zora's going to make it. And then it's really creepy because Umbre is really creepy. And then it's like a cold finger up your spine. You're already creeped out and afraid, and that little string trill just goes sing. You're like, oh, goodness.
And one of my other favorite scenes is after they have escaped all of the doppelgangers, they're all in the car together, they're kind of on their way out. They go back down to the beach, and they see Pluto and their car burning. And Adelaide gets out of the car to have a confrontation with Pluto or some sort of connection with him. And then Jason realizes that they are still mirrored in some way. And so he walks backwards, Pluto walks backwards into the flames. And the music that is happening during this scene is this really great, like, rhythmic. There's some notes of music, and then there's the ting of the baseball bat, which Gabriel is now using as a cane, and then the snap. That Pluto.
Yeah.
And it's just this incredible little rhythm. And then one of my favorite scenes, when Jason backs up and Red stands up behind the car. Oh,
a maroon car.
Good.
And she's wearing the red suit, so you can't.
And she's like out of focus. The focus is so honed in on Jason that even when you see her, it doesn't zoom in on her at all. It isn't until she comes into Jason's frame and like grabs him.
In focus.
It's so cool.
It's really masterful. Just everything about it is masterful. I mean, there's a conversation, I didn't do enough homework, the connections between comedy and horror, but people, I think, unjustly surprised at how good Jordan Peele would be at
horror.
Yeah, it's like, well, he was masterful at comedy. I encourage you to pick up issue 3 of Fangoria, where Tim Heidecker writes an article about the connection between horror and comedy. Tim Heidecker also has a lot of weird horror tinges in his comedy. It's really cool to see this kind of stuff, and it's getting a lot of major play, and that it's incorporating different ideas and diversity in a way that a lot of horror is missing, and a lot of movies in general are missing too. And it also respects the fact that there's a documentary, Horror Noir, that just came out on Shudder, that Black communities have always been huge fans of horror, humongous connoisseurs and, appetites for this stuff. So it's just really neat.
Yeah, I saw a tweet the other day that was talking about how Lupita Nyong'o is a dark-skinned Black woman who is headlining this film that, of course, made more than people were expecting because people have poor expectations about movies with diverse casts, which is still bonkers to me. And how white feminists are not talking about it in the same way as they're talking about Captain Marvel and Wonder Woman when it came out. And I think we really do need to think about how we talk about these things. Elizabeth Moss is great. I haven't seen Handmaid's Tale. Oh, I saw Top of the Lake, the first episode or the first season of that.
Yeah, I liked the first season a lot.
But you know, and as great as she is too, I really think we need to be thinking about how we're talking about these actors and making sure that we're promoting them. You know, I was nervous about seeing the film initially because I don't like horror films, but I wanted to support Jordan Peele. I wanted to support a cast of Black actors in whom the final family, none of them die.
Nope.
They all survive.
It's actually pretty adorable. At one point after a big, blowout, they all kind of come like slouching back in together, like tired out. And like, well, no more boats. Boats are done. And then they're about ready to leave, and they're arguing over who has the biggest kill count in the family. It's so like pedestrian at one point, but it's so important. And even to that point too, one actor that we didn't talk about who I just find to be like such a magnetic person is Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who I first saw this summer in Aquaman. He played Manta. Really compelling guy. He has just a very small role here as Adelaide's father. So magnetic. I mean, just you could see the muscles through his shirt. The way where he's upset after the switches happen, he doesn't know about it. They've taken the child to the psychologist, and the meeting's not going well, and he comes out, he's out of frame, but he tugs on her shirt, and then her pigtail, and then on her shirt again, and the way his face, I find him just so electric, so compelling, and really excited because he will play Candyman. They're remaking Candyman. You can't really replace Tony Todd, you really can't. But again, iconic Black horror. It's there. People love this stuff. It's important in the way that horror talks to all of these themes. That even some of, Green Book winning Best Picture, give me a fucking break, right? Yeah. What about this stuff? This is really important. Horror allows us to talk about these things in a way that sometimes is more palatable.
Absolutely. And I think there are so many other things I could dive into. The fact that Adelaide pretty much spends almost the entire movie in chains, and still that doesn't slow her down at all. This idea that we're Americans, and so we deserve this certain level of privilege. The fact that we don't know what Gabriel or Adelaide do for a living, but they're clearly wealthy. And it's not a bit like nobody talks about it literally at all. It's just a thing. Here's a wealthy Black family. So there's all of these little things that really contribute to the, I don't want to say progressiveness because it shouldn't be, but the way that we're sort of inching closer to getting away from stereotypes and getting more accurate depictions of real life people, real life marginalized communities, and giving these actors the respect and the acclaim that they are due.
Well, just, the chance to see how masterful they are. I mean, when you see, like, the example at the fair, the kind of drunk dad and the mom, it looks like a family would, so it's not really interesting. But then when it flashes to seeing their tethered doubles and the way that they move, you're like, these people are brilliant. They're so gifted in the ability of what they're able to do with their bodies and their faces. People need to be able to see this art because it's moving, and it helps you understand your place in the world a bit better. That's what it does for me.
Absolutely. And can I just say too, Madison Curry,
who
plays the young Adelaide. There are many moments in this film in which I genuinely feel frightened, but her smile, I couldn't even watch it the second time. It is so good and so horrifying.
When she cuffs the Red to the bed and puts on the Thriller shirt and leaves, she walks 15 feet without breaking eye contact.
Ugh,
it is scary,
right
but
now.
You know what it is? Me too. It is me.
Yes.
And that is what's really scary about it. It's not just like, I want it like, now you're fucked.
And the thing is, that is the girl that grows up to be the character that we root for.
And so she's got some sand to her. It's weird how she turns into, like super nice mom when you come from that. But at the same time, aren't we all capable?
Right.
We're all capable of such great things and such dark things.
So there is one other thing I wanted to discuss,
Yes.
Which is Jason.
Yes.
I thought he also did a really great job.
Because he did both roles.
He did both roles.
Yeah.
I really like the sound that Pluto makes. That weird,
growly,
like, growly purring kind of sound is really interesting to me. I think there's this really interesting connection between them that is slightly different than all of the other characters, because when he does end up taking Pluto into the little closet, he's holding his hand the whole way. He's not just like leading him down the hallway. He's actually taking him there, and he's engaging with him in a way that's a little more intimate and a little more personal. And so I have this theory that I believe that by the end of the film, Jason knows that his mother was originally a tethered.
They share a look, and his face in that scene is, anyone who would be affixed with that look, any guilt that you have would come to the forefront. It is so powerful, that look, and it is a knowing look. And
I think the way he puts the mask down in a scenario where he doesn't need to, they're safe now. Like when he was at home, he was still wearing the mask, but it was still up on his head.
He only pulls it down when it was danger.
It feels like an acknowledgement, and almost like I know you for who you are, but I will be your Pluto. This is the reality in which we live. And I think, I'm not sure if he knows it, but I think there might be some inkling of it, because he is the one that comes back into the house into Kitty and Josh's house after Adelaide goes back to get the keys and ends up killing the second twin that didn't die the first time. And she kills the twin with scissors. And Jason walks in and sees her holding these scissors, and there's this like split-second moment. It's very quick. And then she tosses the scissors away.
Well, she's snarling in triumph, basically.
Yeah, and so just the way he sees that, and then is, kind of seeing the carnage, and she pulls him away. But after she finally kills Red and has this pure, triumphant, primal scream, and then that laugh that sounds just like Red when Red first came to the house, she finds Jason in the locker.
In the same room.
And is like, no, it's okay, it's me. And she like kind of pulls her hair back to kind of like look in my eyes.
Yeah.
But her hands are covered in blood, and she
hugs him. His arms are around her, but they do not touch her.
And when she holds up her hand for him to put his fingers through, like earlier in the movie, he doesn't. And she makes him do it.
Yeah.
So I really think that he understands this situation a lot more than the other family members.
The second viewing was the first time that I realized that he was in the same room when Adelaide finally killed Red. I wonder how much he heard of the conversation. I don't know. And I feel like, seeing your mom like do something like that would be pretty weird. You might be afraid of her in the way that he seems to be, maybe has a little bit of problems with, but to that end, it was like, it's more than just fear. Not just like, oh, mom could kick my butt. It's a misgiving. It's a unease.
And I think he, too, in a different way than Zora, also exhibits that intelligence, and that it's a much quieter, perceptive kind of observance in intelligence. But I also love the moment when Zora and Jason go into Kitty and Josh's house after their mom has been dragged inside and their dad lured Josh outside, and
Tex.
Zora picks up. That's true. I'm sorry. Josh is dead at this point. Tex.
He's dead.
Zora picks up the golf club and then is going to go upstairs, and Jason picks up the geode on the little stand, and Zora gives him this look, and he just goes, I don't know.
What else am I going to
Like, it's just
he pulls down his mask, and they're like, okay, let's go.
They're like, okay, let's do this.
But it was such a sisterly look, like, really?
Yeah. And I love, too, you mentioned this a little earlier, the way that Zora interacts with Jason. But when they bump fists,
after his magic trick is finally successful.
Yeah, after she reaches out and they bump fists, I think it's a really great relationship. And it builds on what was in the movie before. It wasn't that they went through this experience and then all of a sudden we're super close.
Yeah, that's kind of
It was
dull.
that this is just an acknowledgement of, we're here, we've done all this shit. Like, I also love there's so many funny moments in this film, but when they're in Josh and Kitty's house and they're saying, the parents are like, I don't want the kids to be scared, and they both just say, too late.
Yeah. You're scaring the kids. When he's saying that because he was just frightened
and
by
there's
her.
literally dead bodies just on the ground
right
around
here.
them.
I mean, yeah, the funny moments really work because it's Jordan Peele. And, but even those little touches, that's what makes this movie. For me, the movie wasn't scary. It was, however, very creepy and unsettling. And there's so many of those little touches, like the fist bump, those are deliberate choices that make it such a rich tapestry that you really get to know these people in that way so that you can explore the idea of their doppelgangers. They're not just one note. So, always like Evil Spot, he has a goatee, so he must be bad or something, whatever. It gives you so much texture in that way that I didn't really think that anyone was going to die, the major family, but you care for them. You feel for them. You like their personalities. And I didn't ever feel like they were tropes. Again, not knowing the full extent of horror tropes, but it's usually there's the jock kind of egotistical man who thinks he can save everybody. There's the final girl, the virginal kind of rescue me sort of situation. There's, all these different troped characters that kind of make up a stereotypical horror film, but I never felt like these people were one-dimensional. Like you said, they were nuanced, they were interesting. I was rooting for them, and I really cared about what happened to them specifically. Josh and Kitty? Meh. I was like, oh no, they died, and the twins died, that sucks, and then all the other people, I'm trying to think, I think almost all the other people that we see, the dead bodies, are white. Yeah. And I didn't care. Which would be... white people I'm white, and white people are terrible. Well, I would say that everybody's awful, but I'm a misanthrope, so... Yeah, a wealthy area like Santa Cruz would be terribly surprised to see. We don't really see anybody that isn't tethered after the beach scene. Everybody else is either tethered or dead after that. And that's the thing, too, maybe that'll circle us back a little bit, but when she rescues Jason under the tunnels, she says, everything's going to be like it was before. Everything's okay. Not really. When the entirety of the population is probably replaced by the tethered, where do you go from here? I just envision some sort of post-apocalyptic hellscape. But the last scene in the movie isn't the knowing look that Jason gives his mother. It's a big pan of all these tethered in their red jumpsuits holding hands. And it's clear that it stretches probably from sea to shining sea. In fact, when Adelaide's going to go down into the tunnels the first time, she sees it starts in the ocean, that somebody's out there. And that is a direct nod, which is referenced in the film, to this Hands Across America, which young Adelaide was wearing a T-shirt from, and she is left with, red is left with that underground. Hands Across America. Most people did a lot of research on that. I would be really interested to see what the Google search spike would be for that. It was 1986. So that was people were going to hold hands across the continental United States to raise money for hunger awareness. It was a bit of a disaster in that it didn't stretch coast to coast, that the operating costs far exceeded what was able to donate, and that, it didn't really work out. It was also controversial because it was criticism of the Reagan administration for underfunding poverty programs anyway. And when it said we shouldn't have to hold hands across America for us to do something about hunger, and the response was, well, it's by people not knowing how to get this help, not that there's not enough help to do that. So it was probably one of the most 80s things to happen in the 80s, as they said, I read online, because it was a big charity thing. It had a lot of celebrities, and it had a pop song to go with it. Yeah, after the success of Live Aid, which of course was in 1985, that Bob Geldof
organized that was to raise money for Africa. It kind of had the same idea, but yeah, it did not work out the way it was envisioned.
I think that's a really interesting thematic point in this film, is that the young girl who's left underground, who was, what do you want to call it, a human, an above ground person, the thing that she's left with is this t-shirt, Hands Across America. And it's a figural of red figures stretched across. So this gives her this vision, this idea that the tethered are going to break out, they're going to replace their doppelgangers, and then they will replicate this Hands Across America to show people what was been hiding. And Gabe, at some point, he and Zora see it. She's like, look, what are they doing? And he says, it looks like some kind of fucked up performance art, which the first one was, and the second one was too, that you kill people, you maybe take some of their clothes, you do it, and then they stand there. Well, then what? Then what, Red?
Right.
Then what for anyone else? So the first one was a failure. The second one, probably a failure too. But man, that's interesting.
Yeah, I kept going back to this idea of no known purpose. That after these tethered killed their above ground doppelgangers and they held hands, what then? Was there a purpose? Like, would they stop killing people? It's very interesting.
Like, they are gonna get so sunburned. That's all I could think of. So there, yeah,
yeah. So I think one thing that I really like about good films and good art are things that make me think.
Yes.
That incite questions. I don't necessarily need to have all the answers to these questions. We've discussed a lot of really interesting things, but I'm okay with not knowing all the answers, with not knowing how Red got all of those jumpsuits and scissors, with not knowing...
It's going to be a great costume this year.
With not knowing what is going to happen after the events of this movie. I just like thinking about these things and speculating, and I think that this film does a really good job of bringing up those questions, and it may mean something slightly different to me than it may mean to something else, but I think it's a really great film, and I highly recommend it.
I do as well, and there's some things that I wanted to touch on we didn't get to. Symbolism of rabbits and hares, look that up. The idea of the shaman's vision quest that later in present day is just papered over as Merlin's quest.
Which, by the way, in that same scene after it's the Merlin's quest, Kitty is reading a magazine, and I noticed this both time, and she was like, isn't this beautiful? And it was a Native American headdress.
Native appropriation and papering over things, like mistakes of the past, genocide.
Ignoring these things. We put them down in tunnels. Yeah.
And the last scene in the film that we see of them is they're all kind of just like looking, and it's the same kind of look as like, you can't go back from that. Now you understand that things are a little bit different, and that there's something else going on this entire time that you were alive, that your whole life was built on top of this, quite literally. And now you had to beat it into, bloody submission. And who are you now because of that? This whole idea about privilege. But I wanted to read a little bit H.P. Lovecraft, one of the founder of our feast, so to speak, and speaking of racism, your crazy racist uncle. But talking about how this movie, I think, not just scary and kind of gruesome, but in a way that is more satisfying as horror. So he writes, this type of fear literature must not be confounded with a type of externally similar but psychologically widely different. The literature of fear, physical fear, and the mundanely gruesome. These things are not the literature of cosmic fear in its purest sense. The true weird tale has something more than secret murder, bloody bones, or a sheeted form clanking chains according to rule. A certain atmosphere of breathless and unexplainable dread, of outer, unknown forces must be present, and there must be a hint expressed with a seriousness and portentousness becoming its subject, of that most terrible conception of the human brain, a malign and particular suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature which are our only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the demons of unplumbed space. It's good not to know, and that's what makes it really scary.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with me, Estee, and making sure I didn't die.
You didn't die. The only time you died, I thought was going to die, was when I had an itch and my legs like thrashed.
Oh, it's funny because I didn't jump. I tend to not be a super jumpy person. I'll jump in my soul, but not physically jump. And the first time I didn't really at all. And the second time I was like, I know where all the jumps are. I'll be fine because they're not that many. Completely forgot about one. I did jump and it was pretty funny. Well, this has been another episode of Unlike Any Known Colors. I'm Becca.
I'm Estee.
And thank you so much for listening. You can find all of our podcasts, including this one, on YouTube, Podbean, Spotify, and thefemininfiles.net.